word taken from Baruch Spinoza's philosophy, means to endeavor or persevere. Dion Mattison is the founder and lead instructor of Conatus Surf Club. Born on a sailboat, Dion has been surfing since the age of 1, when his father, Richard Mad Dog Mattison, first put him on a board. Dion began teaching surf lessons in 2000 in Santa Cruz, and then teaching privately in San Francisco. After moving to New York, Dion launched Conatus Surf Club with the aim of providing high-quality, individualized instruction. Dion is a Ph.D. candidate in the philosophy department at the New School for Social Research and teaches fashion history and visual culture at Parsons, the New School for Design. He has lived in New York since 2009 and has been a steady fixture in the lineup in Rockaway Beach. He is our guest on this week's episode. I'm Tyler Brewer, and this is Swell Season Surf Radio. Welcome to the show. We got a great episode here with Dion Mattison. It's a doozy. We go deep. We discuss all sorts of things, philosophy, surfing, how the two mix, how it forms a basis for this thesis paper, this paper that Dion is writing, and it's really interesting and really excited for you all to hear this episode. So just before we get started, Swell Season is part of the Wax Radio Network. Go to wax.radio to find older episodes and other shows. And and we're psyched to have you all listening. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Swell Season Surf. And also we are, I'm excited to announce we're going to be forming a new partnership with the Newsstand, which is a recording studio in Rockefeller Center. So we'll be working with them and hopefully be having some better audio quality and bringing on some more contributors for the show, so we're excited. But enough about that. Let's get into this wonderful interview with our guest, Dion Mattison, and we'll see you on the other side. Enjoy. Gonna hit record and let it go, but basically, like, use it when you're talking about like everyday life. What are you talking about? Taking the lessons learned from surfing and applying them to your everyday, or is it?
Oh no, I mean, behold, like what it is like. So the philosopher that I'm working on for this chapter that I'm working on right now is Martin Heidegger, who is one of the fathers of a philosophical methodology called phenomenology. And so it's how things in the world can tell us about us being the kind of beings that behold the things in the world. So, and that care about the fact that we exist. So we have conversations about it. That's what makes us distinct from the other creatures.
Yeah.
Because we're the kind of animal that has logos, that has speech or discourse or gives account of things. And so when I'm doing a phenomenology of surfing, so what, like, I'm looking at like waves in their waveness, like what are we that we can see waves and interact with them. And then like, what is a wave? Like, what is the phenomenality of a wave beyond just the scientific description? But actually, the scientific description itself is enough to like blow your mind. So I've been working on a lot of quantum physics recently. I'm not very good at math, but I have a good imagination. And actually, so I have a book club with Conatus, and now a film club. So it's my only social, my business is my only social life, actually, even before the pandemic, but now extra. now extra with the pandemic. And so on Mondays we do film club, and we watched actually that Terry Fitz and Shane Horan Surfer's Journal that you shared with me last night. And then we're reading a book for book club called Reality is Not What It Seems, The Journey to Quantum Gravity by Carlo Rovelli. And so we got started on this because we read a book called Tides, right? Everybody always is asking me about like, what are the tides? And I had a rough idea of what tides were. And then I read Jonathan White's book, Tides, The Science and Spirit of the Ocean, which every surfer should read. And it turns out if you thought tides were funky, that's because they are crazy. And that led me down this like rabbit hole of like, well, we don't know what gravity is. And it's actually one of the unsolved problems of physics is what is gravity. When you start asking like, so the tides, like wondering like how the tides work in different places, and like why the Bay of Fundy has those like 30 odd 40 foot like, and then places in northern England and in France has crazy tides, as we know from watching surf contests. Yeah. In France, where they're like, surfing a shore break and then they're like 5 miles out to sea.
I've experienced that where like within a session, you've had like 4 or 5 different sessions almost because of the tide made it feel like totally different breaks.
Totally. So this led me down this rabbit hole anyway, to quantum physics and to like understanding like how the moon and the sun, like how the universe, like, and I care about being, like, what does it mean that we're all here anyway? And like, I care about the Big Bang and like maybe what before happened, maybe what was before the Big Bang. I care about theological questions such as the existence or non-existence of God, things like this. And it multiverse. Multiverse, care about all that. And so one of the things that's really crazy, so we're reading this quantum physics book by Rovelli in book club. And one of my hypotheses that I'm kind of throwing out there is that if you really pay attention as a surfer, so that the field, the electromagnetic field of the ocean that we're in, the ocean itself is a field and these waves come through it, we have a very perspicuous real life example of a wave field where these constant moving and waves upon waves and these constant changes. And so actually we have the best non-imaginal, real, practical, experiential, experimental experience of like how reality is actually constituted by wave forces. Because everything, matter is a wave, like the whole, like the quantum physicists say that actually the universe operates according to this universal wave function, which you get to by the Schrodinger equation. This guy, Erwin Schrodinger.
Yes.
Anyway, so
Schrodinger's cat. Everyone
exactly. Yeah, the cat.
Example.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very important.
Cat. Yeah, very important. It totally is the cat in the box. That's how I think we have, and it was funny. So we were in book club, and like they were my students, and my students haven't been barreled yet. But then when you're like reading about black holes and like energy like collapsing on itself, and wave functions collapsing and wave functions branching and stuff like that, like I don't know, like I might
does time stand still in the tube? That's the big question.
It absolutely does not. Time does not stand still. Anybody who says that is a moron who does not understand how time works. First of all, there's no such thing as time.
Well, there's that discussion.
There's no such thing. But time does not. No, time. I mean, time doesn't actually totally exist. So, I mean, that's like a whole.
It's a concept. It's a construct of that we've created.
But there is an arrow of time. There is entropy.
Yes. Yeah.
The universe is expanding. We're all going to die.
It's all falling apart, basically. It's all expanding outwards at a crazy rate. And there's no evidence that it will reverse back, and it's just eventually atoms, everything will separate, fall apart, and expand out. Much like, if you just pour water somewhere and it just expands and evaporates, basically.
Yeah. Like they say, when you pour cream into your coffee, it mixes and it changes color, but it's hard to like undo the cream into the coffee.
Exactly. You can never unbreak the egg that you dropped. It won't come back. I've read a few philosophy books that discuss that whole concept, of reversing time. It wouldn't, you couldn't physically bring that egg back, you know, if you
That's
dropped
why
it.
we are constantly trying to get more tubes.
Exactly.
Because time did not stand still.
It did not stand
Either
still long
you
enough.
made it, you did it, either you made it, you didn't make it, or like in either case you still want to do it again.
Exactly. So that's a nice, so this was a great heady little intro for all our listeners to go into here.
Oh yeah. Who's this nut job you're talking to, Tyler?
Well, I love this sort of stuff, and I think a lot of our listeners are really into it. So, but first, let's create a little foundation here, Dion. So, Dion, you run a surf club called Conatus Surf Club.
That's
Can you
correct.
first give me the definition of Conatus and the definition of the club, basically?
Okay, well, Conatus comes from the philosophy of Baruch or Benedict Spinoza. I think his nickname was actually Bento.
Not Benny?
Maybe somebody called him Benny. I was working on a children's book about the Conatus for a little bit with my friend Andrew, where I called him. I made a character called Benny. Yeah, Bento. Bento was his nickname, I guess. So he was a 17th century. It's Portuguese, but grew up in Amsterdam because his parents fled the Catholic Inquisition in Portugal. He ended up getting excommunicated from the Jewish synagogue and from the Catholic Church. So good, because he had this theory that so he's one of the beloved philosophers of scientists because he comes up with this idea called Deus sive natura, God or nature. So when he's talking about the big other, he always says God or nature. Like I'm not some people call it God, some people call it nature. Let's keep both. So he's trying not to offend he ended up offending everybody. Anyway, so
I just gotta say that the interesting parallel there with like Tom Blake's God equals nature, is kind of interesting. I find when you mentioned this, when we talked before, I was just like, I couldn't help but combine the two in some ways. And that there's kind of fortuitous with your name. It kind of works. That's kind of like the glue in my head.
Yeah. Although it's funny because, or versus and, or is like making that ontological equivalent, like Spinoza leaves it open a little bit more because he's actually really in a way that Tom Blake wasn't. He's actually really worried about religious persecution. Somebody tried to murder him in public.
Had he been born with Tom Blake, he might have agreed with Tom Blake these days, as opposed to.
He might have been able to have a little bit, but he also, well, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. Conatus, though, is a Latin word. It's a noun that comes from the verb conatur, which means to endeavor or persevere, roughly. And actually, there's this neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, that works on Spinoza, who's obsessed with Spinoza. He has a book called, Looking for Spinoza, Joy, Sorrow, and the Feeling Brain. And there's this force within being that Spinoza notices that he calls the Conatus, that once a thing exists, it endeavors to persevere in its own existence to the best of its ability. So there's a drive for flourishing or homeostasis. So it's not that it wants to persist it doesn't want to endeavor or persevere at just some